Hello and welcome to Why Is This Happening with me, your host, Chris Hayes. Well, I'm not going to pretend up front that I am anything other than a soccer football casual. I am not someone. There are increasingly Americans who are like incredibly devoted to soccer, as it's called here, football. The rest of the country, the rest of the world. I'm not one of them. I grew up a huge basketball, baseball, football fan. Have been my whole life. Am now still. Can really know those three games, particularly basketball. I know very well. Soccer, I am a kind of casual fan of. The reason I say all this is that I have derived such incredible joy from the World Cup, not just in watching the games, which has been incredibly enjoyable and entertaining, but the phenomenon of it. I just think there's so much about the World Cup that is so rich in the fans, the behavior, like what it means to be a global community, if anything could ever happen that way. All of the through lines that run through the tensions of the globe, from the Iranian national team being treated like absolute garbage by the American government to these incredibly fraught matches between colonial powers and the nations they had colonized, the question of race, which is just on the surface of all of these, and global power and corruption. So it's like it's both fascinating, entertaining as a sport, incredibly rich just as a topic. And I've been thinking about it a lot, watching a lot of it, and texting a bit with my friend and my colleague Ayman Mohadeen, who is a supremely talented journalist, broadcaster, and also an enormous, like true soccer fan, like the real deal, like knows the game, played the game. His brother was a professional soccer player. And so I thought, like, I want to talk to someone about all of this, about all the different angles of this. So I thought Ayman would be the perfect person. So Ayman, welcome to the program.
Chris, great to be with you. Thanks for having me.
I am right that your brother played soccer professionally?
He did. He did. He actually played here in the US before MLS started. And he played for, at the time, the team was the Atlanta Silverbacks. And Atlanta now has a professional team in MLS, but he played for a team at the time that was called the Atlanta Silverbacks, which was a semi-professional league here in the US.
And you were born, if I'm not mistaken, you're born in Egypt and then you moved to
Right.
Georgia when you're like 6. Is that right?
Actually, yes, I was born in Egypt. My parents actually initially moved to Detroit, Michigan. So we spent a little bit of time in Detroit, Michigan, but then we ended up moving to Atlanta, Georgia, or to be more specific, Marietta, Georgia. And so I ended up playing high school soccer. Both my brother and I were modestly saying pretty decent by, at the time, Georgia standards. We both, were all state and all county, and ended up going
That's
on.
good.
It is. It
Yeah,
is.
that's legit. Yeah.
I put it with the caveat, the asterisk, that it was in the early 1990s, right?
Right.
So because
There's not as many people playing, right?
correct.
Yeah.
That's what I'm saying, because I think American soccer has evolved tremendously. And I just want to make sure that I put it in context for your listeners that, where American soccer was in the 1990s, where two people like my brother and I could come in from Egypt, which is a soccer obsessed country, as you know.
Yep.
And we played in Egypt. And when we came here to the US, the gap was so vast between our skill sets and some of those that we were playing with.
Yeah, it's funny when it was I guess it would be 26 years ago that I was in Italy, in Bologna, for a semester studying abroad. And I was like not a great basketball player. I was like played varsity basketball, didn't start, was not like nothing special. Couldn't play D3, right? But I went to Italy, and Bologna is actually like the center of
Yeah.
Italian basketball.
Yeah.
This is 26 years ago. And I would play pickup ball every day, and there, like, I could really hoop. And it was really fun because it was a sort of the same dynamic you're describing, right?
Yeah.
Which is just like Americans were more advanced in the game. We had been playing it longer. You
Correct.
start earlier, you develop skills earlier. So I came in as like not a very good basketball player in the US, but then there playing pickup, it was like, oh, the Americans here.
The
Like, I
Americans
want him
here.
on my team. It felt so good. It was like the most fun thing ever.
No, you're absolutely right. And, and it gets to the point about what sports in America, what do you excel in as a country versus other countries? Why has basketball taken off in this country versus other countries? And are they starting to catch up to the US? And is US beginning to catch up to global soccer and global football after years of lacking behind? And I think those are very important questions, because it's about how the sport is introduced to children in this country, right? I mean, the way that I look, my kids now, I didn't grow up in New York, but my son is 7 years old. He has now become obsessed with basketball in large part because his first kind of introduction to the sport is because of what just happened with the New York Knicks and this like
Of
unbelievable
course.
run. And he saw the city and we watched it. And now everywhere he sees a hoop or a basketball court in the city, he wants to go shoot. And so it's very interesting because I'm thinking where I was at that age when I was 7 years old, and every single day we would grab a soccer ball and just go down to the streets in Cairo and kick the ball around. And for us, it was like it's this parallel between my life and his life, but in two very different
Yeah.
sports that makes me understand how the two countries interact with that sport differently.
You know, it's interesting you note this because I think there's a kind of hierarchy that's worth noting, which is of all the sports that are popular in the world, I think soccer requires the least amount of equipment and space. Like if you have a ball, and sometimes that could be wadded up rags in the favelas of Rio or whatever. You can find a space to play soccer. Next up from that is basketball, which requires hoops but nothing else,
Right.
right? You just got to find hoops. And then you get to like baseball and football and hockey, things like that are incredibly require like lots of space and
Correct.
lots of people and lots of equipment. And so there is a kind of populism to those two sports in particular, I think, because they require so little to play.
100%. And I couldn't agree with you more. And actually, and it's in large part why you're seeing basketball explode in places like Africa and the NBA expanding with the African Basketball League in the NBA. And you're seeing that because of the fact that it took a minute for people to realize what the sport was and how to play it. But once the sport began to take hold in these communities around the world, it has totally exploded. And you're starting to see that's why some countries are starting to catch up to the US. I don't think anyone's close yet, but I think some countries are beginning to catch up in the skill set because the
No, they
way,
are.
yeah,
Yeah, and that was actually one of the things that was so fun about these last Olympics is that
yeah.
it was not a romp. I mean, the
It was
U.S.
not
won, but
1992 Dream Team.
exactly, it was not a romp, and it was they were really challenged. And they really had to dig deep and fight. And what so there is nothing like the World Cup, and I felt this time every time the World Cup comes around, I sort of fall back in love. I think more than any other World Cup, this one, and I think it's because it's here. Obviously, that's part of it. And when I go to work, when we show up in Times Square every day,
Yeah.
there's some every day. There's you never know who it's going to be, but there's some
Right.
enormous swarm of fans
Yeah.
in Times Square. Like maybe it's Brazilians, maybe it's Colombians,
Yeah.
maybe it's Moroccans. You never know. And what if you had to put your finger, like, what is there's something, it's not like the Olympics. I think it's way better than the Olympics in terms of what it brings out. There's ugliness it can bring out as well, but there's something, it shrinks the world in a way that I feel like nothing else does. And I can't quite, what is it about the World Cup and about football, soccer that does that?
I think, in my opinion, the sport of soccer is a universal language more so than any other sport. And it's a
Yeah.
sport that actually can shrink in real time the distance between two people who cannot speak any other language. If you and I are sitting in a room with fans from Japan and fans from South Africa and Brazil, and we're watching the same game, we are all speaking that same language.
Yeah.
And when you take that and you see what the world can be in terms of what the World Cup does, which is truly bring the world together and shrink the spaces between cultures and communities and put geopolitics. And I mean, there are a lot of geopolitical currents in the game, but
Yes.
when you can shrink that space among the fans, you realize why people are so drawn to the sport. And then there's storylines. I think this is the most important part of a big part of the sport of soccer and football. It's the storyline of the individual players and what they represent in the communities they come from. As you said, when you get somebody who's born in a favela or in the slums of some country and rises to the pinnacle of the sport, it is because the belief that that person's talent and his meritocracy allowed him to excel. And it does so in a way that I think is more harmonious than necessarily in other sports, right? I think there is
Mm,
this kind of egalitarianism to the sport. There's this kind of
mm.
meritocracy to the sport that no matter where you come from, and this is the part where America needs to get better at this essence of who gets to play in the sport, and we can talk about that in a
Yes.
little bit. But really, in most of the world, the way this sport is introduced to young people is that kids play it in the streets. They played in small communities. They get scouted by clubs or they get discovered by local clubs. And then those clubs become partners in the development of those young kids. I think in the US, it's a little bit different. And in the US, it's about, can you afford to put your kid in a club? And
No,
it's
it's
become
much more affluent.
it's much
100%.
more
Yeah.
affluent, and that's a part we can talk about in the US, and how that can get better. But I think in terms of why the sport is so appealing is because it draws people from all around the world. It's a language that people understand. The stories of the athletes and what they become to symbolize, it's about meritocracy. There's an element of egalitarianism to it. And then, of course, the national identities and how people form their allegiances to both players, clubs, and countries.
And there's also, I mean, I think for people too, because the sport is very international in its non-World Cup iterations, right? If you're
Right.
following different teams in different leagues, you're following these players in other contexts. It's sort of necessarily international. So then and I felt that way quite a bit about, about when I watched the Olympic basketball, right? It's like, oh, I know those guys.
Yeah.
It's like, whoa, there's Rui Hachimura on the
Yeah.
Japanese team. And like, man, he's balling out. Like, I know him from the Lakers. And so you have that too, because there's so much familiarity, because when they're not playing the World Cup, all these stars are playing
On
in,
club teams, yeah.
leagues that people follow. So for global soccer fans, it's like, it's just, it's all the stars are out there. It's like, I know that guy.
Yeah, and look, honestly, I can give you so many examples of it, but you have two of the best players in the world who are about to go up against each other in this World Cup, with Ashraf Hakimi from Morocco and Kylian Mbappe from France, who actually played together at PSG for many years.
That's right.
And they're almost like, as they are brothers. I mean, these guys go on vacation together, they hang out together, they're always posting with each other on social media. But when they're on that field representing their countries, they are on the field enemies. They're basically competitors. Is probably the better word than enemies, but they're competitors, and they go at it. And the fans who love the sport love those storylines of how
Yes.
these individuals represent their countries and then represent their clubs. And also, I got to say, Chris, like, we talk a lot about how long the NBA season is or how long baseball season is. These guys are literally playing almost 11 months of the year, both for club teams, national teams. And then on top of that, their national teams are either playing World Cup qualifiers, European or continental qualifiers in Africa or South America. Then you're playing clubs, but on the club level, you're playing in the Champions League, domestic leagues, certain cups. So you're talking about players that are playing anywhere between, sometimes 70 games a year, anywhere between like 50 to 70 games a year. And it's 90 minutes, sometimes a little bit longer. It is peak physical performance. And so and the reason why I bring that up is because when you watch somebody like Lionel Messi or Cristiano Ronaldo, who are, 39 and 41 years old, you can't but just have the utmost
Totally.
respect for the way that they have conditioned their bodies mentally and physically.
There's another aspect to soccer that I rediscover every 4 years of the World Cup, and this is not at all a novel insight, but many, many people have said this. But the particular psychology and exhilaration of a soccer game. And I think the thing that I've been thinking about, because I read this book called Addiction by Design, or Addictive by Design, Natasha Dow, and it's referenced in Siren's Call, my most recent book. And it's a sort of anthropological exploration of slot machines, slot machine design, who makes slot machines, how casinos deploy them, and why people love them. And a huge part of the way, the addictiveness of a slot machine, is that you're there and like most of the time, nothing happens. But you're always just one roll away from something huge happening.
Right.
And so it's build up, build up, build up, and then boom, you win. And that build up win, and you never know when it's going to happen. And it might happen, you might win 3 times in 5 pulls,
Yeah.
or you might win once in 200. But that is the exact structure of soccer. It's not like any other sport. It's this heightened tension buildup. You never know when it's going to happen. And then the jackpot exhilaration. And there really is nothing like it. And I do think it's like slot machines, which are like the most addictive thing. And I think it does drive people sort of insane in the same way. Like, it truly brings people to a deranged state because of how intense that buildup is.
I mean, listen, when you go to a soccer game, whether it's for club or country, and you see the fans, and the fans are known as ultras in soccer. These are the most diehard core fans. These are people who will literally, if I'm telling you, like, somebody who's going to walk 18 hours to get to a stadium to be able to watch this game and
Right.
camp out and wait for those tickets. There are people who are like that. There are people who are literally travel the world following their teams with nothing more than a shirt on their back and a couple of, dollars in their pocket just to be able to afford a bus ticket or to get in. And that's why the sport has such an appeal. And a little bit of that is changing, unfortunately, and certainly does change at a high level at the World Cup. But if you go into like the real grassroots level parts of the sports and you see the kind of like second division or third division fans, these are people whose teams represent their communities and their neighborhoods. There's storylines behind why the clubs exist. The clubs represent politics, socioeconomics, all kinds of backgrounds. And so the fans see in these clubs themselves and they realize that they have a part to play in the sport and in the success of their team. Look, I'm going to be very honest with you. I was at the Egypt Argentina game and
Yeah, I want to talk about this
yeah,
next.
and there were about like 60,000 fans in that stadium. I am telling you, I am 100% convinced that the reason why Argentina did not give up while they were down 2-0 is because they probably had 45,000 of those fans
Mm,
nonstop chanting and screaming for the
mm.
entire 90 minutes of the game when they were down 2-0, and then when they went up and won 3-2. And the fans went absolutely berserk. So to your point, it was this emotional roller coaster where they come in expected to win, they go down 2-0, their star player misses a penalty kick, and you can just kind of feel the energy of the entire fans. Not like just the psychology changes, they get depressed, but then as the team starts to rebuild, they get back in it and they drive their team to victory. And for me, it's to what you're describing. It's like this emotional roller coaster that you experience from the first minute with the expectations. You're there with your kids, you're there with your dad, you're there with your daughter, and you're going through this collective emotion together, and you're doing it in harmony throughout the entire 90 minutes of a game.
You were there with you had your Egyptian jersey on. You were there with a whole bunch of folks. Obviously, there's a lot of Egyptian. Yeah, I have not been to a World Cup game. People I know have gone to some. Some of most of the people I know have gone as kind of just like it's fun to bear witness. I know some Americans have gone to the U.S. game, but you're an Egyptian fan in Atlanta in a big marquee game in one of what was one of the most sort of both thrilling and heartbreaking
Yeah.
games. I mean, one of the most incredible games of the entire tournament. Just tell me, what was the atmosphere like? What's it like in the moving through the world of Egyptian fans? I saw videos of you. Like, what are those interactions like? Like, what was the scene like?
I mean, there are no words to describe it, right? But you almost have to kind of take a step back and understand that, when your country plays in the World Cup, it is a time when people from all around the country and all around the world make whatever sacrifices they want to make and can make to come to witness this game, right? And there's always an expectation that's built into it, which is, hey, you're going here knowing that your team is probably going to get knocked out or is not going to make it into the first round. For Egypt, it's a very bittersweet experience because Egypt actually is one of the most, if not the most dominant team in African soccer, right? They have won the most African Cup of Nations in that continent's competition. So they come with a tremendous amount of expectations, but they've always underperformed at the World Cup. And so it always begins with that psychology of, is this game going to be worth it? Shall I try to make the effort to go? And so the opportunity this time around was that Egypt had made it to the round of 16. And this is one of the nicer things about the tournament, the World Cup expanding to 48 teams, is that it gives countries like, Cape Verde, countries like Haiti a chance to compete in the World Cup and
Yeah.
to write new storylines in this glorious tournament. Egypt has been in the tournament before, but they've never been able to write the kind of storyline that fans had expected from them as being such a dominant team from Africa. And so, a lot of Egyptians that I knew, as soon as they made it to the round of 16 and they found out that they were going to go on to play against Argentina, then a lot of friends reached out and were like, yo, we got to make this happen. We got to make this happen.
We gotta go.
I literally, the friend that I went down there with showed up with nothing more than just a t-shirt and bought a red shirt at the stadium so that he could wear it. That's how and he didn't even know if he was going to have a ticket when he got down there. And luckily we managed to make that work out. And so we ended up having this unbelievable experience. As you saw, it's people from all walks of life. Some of them are coming from Egypt. Some of them are coming from Canada. Some are coming from Europe. Everybody's there. Everybody's chanting. Everybody's having a great time. And then you're in this stadium watching this once in a lifetime talent, Lionel Messi. His team goes down 2-0. Egyptians who had always underperformed were bawling out playing the games of
Yes.
their lives, take this commanding 2-0 lead, and everybody in the stadium at that point
Which
had
could have
this,
been a 3-0 lead, to be
which could have been
clear.
a 3-0 lead,
We
and
can
every
talk about that too.
oh my God. And everybody starts thinking like, oh my God, we're about to witness history. We're about to witness, to kind of to explain it since you referenced hockey. It's kind of like the miracle on ice. You've got
Yes.
the Americans going up against the Russians who were favored to win. Nobody perhaps except Egyptian fans and the players on that field thought that Argentina was going to lose that game and lose it in that kind of fashion. Look, the sport of soccer, it's not like a league, it's a tournament, right? So you could end up playing, you could be the best team, but then when you go in there, you're like a number one seed, like in March Madness, you get knocked out. It's just one
Totally.
game and that's it. So
Totally.
you could have a bad 90 minutes and you're out. But Egypt was actually playing incredibly well. And so for us, as you could probably hear from my voice, we were going bananas. It was just crazy in the stadium.
The game ends up turning and Argentina scores
3 goals.
3 goals in the last 17 minutes or
Yeah.
something, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
like something like that.
Yeah.
One of them, the second one, the equalizer for Messi, was just like completely insane, just like a classic. Like Messi is just like somehow like an apparition who just like appears in exactly the right place at exactly the right
Well,
moment.
that's why that is why he is Messi, right? And I get
Yeah,
it.
it was
He is the greatest of all time precisely for what you witnessed in that game yesterday. A guy who starts out, he misses a penalty kick, right? I think that's important to remind our viewers. A lot of people psychologically, if they lose that kind of momentum and they miss a penalty kick and suddenly their team is down 2-0, they would feel like deflated. They would feel defeated and they would feel like, oh my God, they let the team down. But what you saw with Messi is a person who created the first goal with that assist, but stayed in the game and stayed locked in. And then that unbelievable second shot in such a tight space with so much power in between the players, popping up in that moment. It's literally why he is the greatest to ever play the sport.
one of the other dynamics here, right, is like, I mean, I'm such a cliche of a bleeding heart liberal that I basically am like always rooting for the team with smaller GDP. It's like whoever it's like, I don't know. I'm not that I don't have huge investments, but it's like, of course I want like Cape Verde to beat Spain, or I want,
Right.
when we go to Morocco, France. It's like part of that's just American March Madness Cinderella. Part
Yeah,
of
the
this, like,
underdog.
I
You
don't
like
have
the
a
underdog.
yeah, you like the underdog, and in a geopolitical sense. But there is something like profound about there's just not a lot of places in the world. The Olympics is one, but the Olympics is so diffuse. There's so many events. It's almost hard to track. There are just not a lot of places in the world where like it's possible that the Democratic Republic of Congo and Sweden encounter each other as equals, or
Yeah.
that, Haiti and Spain, or the Haiti, like
Right.
Norway and Senegal. The world is so divided. There's such an enormous gap in geopolitical power and pure economic power between these various nations. There is just this inescapable subtext to it all. It's obviously a sport, but you just can't help but think about the last 500 years plus of world history that produced the dispersion of peoples, the dispersion of wealth and resources, and the very different natural lotteries that
Right.
people were born into if the almighty or fate rolled the dice and you got born in Kinshasa, or you got born in Barcelona, or you got born in Brooklyn.
Right. And that's
And there's something inescapable about that for me, and maybe I'm just being like overthinking it, but there's something inescapable about it in every minute that you're watching the tournament.
No, I think that that's such an important point, Chris, and it's not one that should be dismissed lightly. I mean, you take, for example, Morocco versus Netherlands, right? And it's two countries who maybe on paper you don't necessarily think have a lot in common. But when you understand the demographics of the two countries and the kind of like immigrant tensions that have existed between those two countries, there are a lot of both beautiful and fraught storylines in that. And there is tension about who gets to represent which countries and which countries are allowed to draw from which players. Even here in the United States, we had our own experience with a president of the United States who was defending a
Totally.
player who was a product of birthright citizenship. And that president speaks out against birthright citizenship, wants to
Yeah.
get rid of birthright citizenship. The star player that the United States had this year at the World Cup was a product of birthright citizenship because he was born here in this country. He's allowed to represent the United States. But the storylines that you're talking about are what make this game so multi layered because it comes to the question of personal identity, national identity, cultural identity. Who are you? Who do you have an affinity to? Which countries do you love? Which countries do you want to support? Which countries do you cheer on? And sometimes you are cheering indeed just simply for the underdog. Sometimes you're cheering for the countries that represent you and represent your region. And as you said, in that 90-minute game, the powerhouse of a country like Germany and a country like Paraguay, none of their wealth matters. What matters are the 11 players on that team, the tactics of the players, the grit of those players, the skills of those players. And that's why you could see a country like Paraguay knock out one of the most storied countries in the world, like Germany. Those storylines and storylines like Cape Verde or storylines like Egypt, they inspire people and they make you believe that your skills, your merits can have this unbelievable outcome. That if you're given the chance to play on equal footing by the same rules, in the same context, everybody, you're kicking the same ball, the goal is the same size, the field is leveled. You have 11 players, we have 11 players, and you're just going at it from that point on. Now, of course, the game is way more complex than that, but that's what the
Right. And
belief.
there's a lot of feeling that, like, you posted this very funny meme about, because there's been a bunch of controversial, there's use of instant replay. Now, I got to say, instant replay is always controversial and always produces controversy. And
Yeah.
even where you're talking about, like, American football between two teams that don't have any, like, fraught colonial relationship between each other. They're two American cities. There's no, like, undercurrent that, like, one country occupy the other. You
Right.
produce a ton of second guessing and controversy, and my team always gets dropped. So that, like, that's always there in any sport. But then you add the layer of, like, the Iranians were, being treated very poorly by the
Yep.
US government that was making them fly out that night. And then they also got, like, a number of pretty brutal instant replay calls that, like, invalidated goals.
Yep.
There was a very controversial invalidation of a goal, an instant replay in Argentina, Egypt, in the game you were at, and then another foul on Mo Salah that people, or
Yeah.
supposed foul on Mo Salah that people felt should have been called. But it does, then it's like you enter in the normal psychosis of sports, which is that people always think they're being robbed.
Yeah.
They're always screaming at the officials, and they always think instant replay was, like, poorly used. And then you inject it into, like, hundreds of years, right? of history, and also the fact that, like, it isn't an equal world. And, like, the joke you had on social media, which is like VAR, which is the name for the instant replay, is like international law, which is like, it's very useful, but, like, somehow always benefits the rich countries.
Yeah, it depends on the countries that want to enforce it, right? And the referees have that power to say, like, you know what, I want to double check that call. I want to make sure I
Right.
got that call right. Let me go use instant replay. And when they use instant replay, they realize, like, oh, you know what, I can make a decision that can totally flip this game upside down. And unfortunately, we saw that in cases like Egypt. And in some cases, they don't use the instant replay when they clearly should be using it. And that's the part of the sport that I think people get super frustrated with, is that right now, look, I'm a believer personally that when you have technology that can make things more fair and more just, you should use it. The question is,
Yeah.
how do you use it and who gets to use it? This is the problem that we have right now in global soccer. There's no doubt that instant replay has made things better with, like, goal line technology, has made things better in offsides. So you're
Yeah.
really in some ways preserving the integrity of the game when those things are purely automated. But we are now starting to see that instant replay is also being subjectively used. And some plays are going to be reviewed and some plays are not going to be reviewed. And that is the inherent problem as to who gets to use it, when they get to use it. And I do think, look, I am not a conspiracy theorist. I am not a person who just kind of reduces everything to, like, there's a grand conspiracy. But I do think there are some things that are kind of baked into the system that have to get fixed. I think that the organizers of global soccer, which is in this case FIFA, a lot of the major sponsors in the sport, they love to see the traditional powerhouses of soccer playing at the highest levels. They want to see France, Brazil, Spain, Italy, Germany constantly making it to the final rounds, because that is where people tend to watch the most. That's where, viewership is high, sponsorship becomes high. Does that mean there's a directive to say, hey, I want Lionel Messi to play in the final for another World Cup final against France, and everybody's like working to make that happen. I personally don't believe that. What I do believe
No.
is that people would love to see a rematch of Argentina France. And so the conspiracy theorists are out there saying, well, like, look, you've got France versus Morocco playing in the quarterfinals, and you've got 5 refs who are going to ref that game from Argentina. So it makes you wonder,
Right.
you know, like
right.
it makes you wonder how in the world did 5 Argentinian refs, which is just
Right.
an anomaly of itself to have 5 refs from one country, suddenly be the main deciders and potentially making these critical calls in a game like Morocco versus France.
Well, okay, there's 2 things about the officiating that have struck me. Again, and I'm coming out of this from as an outsider
Right.
perspective, which I think is maybe useful and also probably kind of annoying, right? Because when people that don't watch basketball tell me about basketball, I'm like, yeah, yeah. One is just that, like, there's only one main referee. There's people who are
Right.
calling offsides, but there's really one guy or woman who is managing this enormously complicated large field, which is very hard. Like there's a much smaller basketball court and there's 3 refs.
Right.
They all have equal power, right?
Yeah.
So in terms of like eyes per square foot in other sports, there's a lot more officials. And also, I one thing that's really dawned on me watching this World Cup is like they have a lot of discretion and they're really managing the game actively in a way that other officials aren't.
Correct.
Like they're having like these long drawn out conversations. They're kind of like just like, and then the last thing that I would say, and I remember there's been some really interesting academic literature in other contexts, not soccer, but basketball, I think, and football, about the source of home field advantage. Why is there home field advantage? And there's a bunch of reasons. One of them has to do with like travel and travel sleep, right? So the home team is like better rested.
Yep.
One of them has to do with like habituation to the to the environment. One of them has to do with like the energy you get from the crowd. But one of the findings in this literature is that like the crowd noise impacts in the moment and not in a conscious way how a game's officiated. When
Yeah.
you in a basketball game, when you're in a
Yeah.
crowded arena and there's 20,000 people going crazy in an NBA Finals game, and there's one of those calls that could be a charge or it could be a block.
Yeah.
In that blink of an instant, and you're not doing it consciously, it's just human nature. If you call the foul on the opposing team, on the away team, the crowd's going to go nuts.
Yeah.
And if you don't, they're going to, and that at the margins affects people. And all of this to say, when you talk about that Atlanta stadium and the 2/3 of the fans being Argentine fans, I think, you don't have to posit a conspiracy theory that like that was in the head that was affecting the officiating.
Right.
That
Right.
there's this kind of like almost like oral AURAL
Yeah.
lobbying that's happening that it just seeps into the psychology of an official.
Yeah, and I'll tell you one other thing that seeps into the psychology of the official. It is the personas of the people on the field, right? When you
There's
look,
so much interaction. It's
there's so
wild. Like there's so
exactly.
much lobbying. Like
There's so much lobbying. These referees don't live in a bubble, right? They live in the world where they know that Messi is the greatest player of all time. So
right,
when
right,
you're looking face to face in Messi's eyes, you're probably reluctant to give him a red card, knowing that you're
right,
about to kick out a player who's
right.
the greatest of
Totally,
all time, and
totally.
probably somebody who, yes, is not prone to making those types of fouls, but is human and is getting older. So he really could
Right,
have committed a red card foul, which is a foul that
right,
gets you kicked out of the game because it is so severe. But because the ref probably also has somewhat of an inherent bias that it's like, hey, look, this is the Michael Jordan, this is the Wayne Gretzky, this is the Messi of the sport. You're probably thinking to yourself, like, my God, if I give him a red card in the first game of the World Cup, not only is he kicked out of this game, he has to sit out the suspension of the second game. And right or wrong, we can debate that, but at the severity of the punishment. But you're thinking in milliseconds.
yeah, totally,
I'm probably not going to kick him
totally.
out. He probably didn't mean to do that. I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. And that again is what I mean by the persona of the players. If you're a player, and there are notorious players, a lot of them very big, German, Dutch, French defenders who were known to be powerhouse defenders, they were getting yellow cards all the time. And that was part of the persona. And so the ref would have to like assert themselves quickly in the game. If they saw them commit a tackle, go there and give them a yellow card. And it may not have been a yellow card, but that's the way the ref wants to tone the
Right.
pressure of the game down. He wants to send a signal to the players. I'm going to give you a yellow card because I don't want this kind of game. Some referees are much more likely to let the game be a little bit more physical, a little bit more competitive, and in some cases allow for things that normally wouldn't be called. And we go back to that Egypt-Argentina call. People have pointed out the same foul that was committed by an Argentinian player against Austria was not called by the referee in that game. When Argentina played Egypt, a foul committed against Argentina was called by that referee.
Right.
And so what you're realizing is that, like, okay, in the same exact scenario, in the same type of fouls that both led to goals, one was called back because of instant replay, one wasn't. And in that sense, refereeing in soccer, I believe, is a lot more subjective than what you would
Totally.
get, a lot more than what you get in the NFL, for example, or even in basketball.
Yeah, although that dynamic I think does exist. Like Wembanyama, there was a flagrant
Yes,
foul
of course,
that
when
should have
he
been
hit
called on him.
Jalen Brunson in the head. Yep.
Right. And that's an example where I think it's the exact same thing. Somewhere in the back of their head, they were like, oh, he's going to get kicked out of, he's gone and
Yeah.
maybe suspended if we call this flagrant. Like,
Yeah.
and they know it's Wembanyama. Like, people are paying big money. Like, the thing, he's driving
Yes.
the entertainment of the whole thing. He's the marquee name. Let's talk a little bit about the U.S. team. I feel like there's this thing, there's a weird thing, I think that there's a weird dynamic in U.S. soccer, which is basically the following. Since the time that you were playing, say, high school soccer in the U.S. is unquestionably way more popular.
Right.
The MLS is very popular. My dad's is a season ticket holder for NYCFC. Like we didn't grow up in a soccer household. Like he loves them. Youth soccer has exploded in popularity, and Americans' attachment to global soccer. I mean, people like it. You will just randomly run into Americans who are big Arsenal fans or Manchester fans. Like that did not. It's simple. I mean, I think you would agree with me. We're about the same age. That did not exist 30 years ago. Did not exist.
Not at all.
Like unless you were someone who was an expat or an immigrant, and that was like But there was no like kid from suburban Connecticut who's like, I'm staying up late to watch the Arsenal game. It wasn't a thing.
Right.
So you've got this huge growth. MLS is very popular, huge growth in interest, but it doesn't seem like that is translating to like an increase in the quality of the players the U.S. is producing or the U.S. men's national team. The U.S. women's national team is obviously a dominant force in women's soccer. But on the men's side, I don't know if you have theories about that. If you think it's an accurate characterization of the last sort of 30 years of U.S. soccer.
It's a very accurate characterization. And by the way, I think it's a very important thing that you're talking about, because the rise of interconnectivity in the world, and what I mean by that is like satellite and cable channels, and certainly the internet now, is one of the reasons why you have kids who are staying up late to watch the Arsenal game. It's because I can now follow players around the world in real time on their social media.
That's a great point.
I can watch their games anytime I want. I can subscribe to their own channels and watch content about them all the time. And so I can fall in love with the teams at any moment that I want, where I suspect, because we are the same ages, when I was growing up in the 80s and 90s, soccer was not on the TV every day like the way NFL games are and all that stuff. That's just a very basic introduction to the sport. But the way the sport is played in America is where the fundamental breakdown happens. And I'll tell you what I mean by that. If you're a 14-year-old kid in the suburbs of Paris in France, and you've been playing soccer, and your local team or local club discovers you, or you try out for a team and they say you're really good, you get put onto that team, and the team becomes a partner in your development. Meaning, like, in some cases they'll pay you, in some cases they'll pay you to go to school, even at a young age. In some cases, they'll give you whatever they can in terms of free access to resources so that you come and play for that team. And as you get better, and as the team succeeds, they're allowed to then either trade you or sell you as you get 15, 16, 17 years old. And so they make money off of you. And so there's this incentive to find the best players, irrespective of their backgrounds, irrespective of whether they can afford to pay you or not. Now, I live in New York. I can tell you that system does not exist in the United States. And it doesn't exist in the United States at large. Maybe there's one or two teams that are trying it. But if I'm putting my son in a local youth soccer team here in New York, I'm paying thousands of dollars a year to be able to put him to go practice twice a week to potentially become a player. Now, that team is the reward incentive here is the fact that there is a parent who wants to put his kid in soccer because the kid is enjoying it and you want him to do some kind of activity. And they're making a lot of money off of individual families who are willing to pay to put these kids in there. That's exactly the complete opposite incentive structure than what we see in most of the world. And so the club team in the youth development is the more accurate word for it. The youth development system in the United States at this stage, which has tens of thousands of soccer players because soccer is truly exploding in America, but it's seen more as a money making endeavor to actually make money for these clubs through the parents. Whereas overseas, it's how do we make money through the players as they get older? And it's like a long term investment.
Hmm.
You got to find a way in the United States to inverse that. That's one theory. The second theory, I hate to say, and it's something that I personally experienced, is that if you are athletic in this country, and you're at that moment in your life where you're 13 and 14 years old,
Exactly. Yes.
you're suddenly presented with, hey, man, you're really athletic. You should consider basketball. Hey, you're really tall. You should consider being a swimmer. Hey, you're really tall. You should consider being, a point guard. Whatever it is, you should come and try to play baseball. You have a really strong arm. Go throw the ball. Maybe you're a football player. And so immediately in that
Yeah.
high school level, you are kind of competing with 4 or 5 different sports, all of whom down the road are way more lucrative for young Americans who are considering which sport they are probably good at, but also which sport could potentially be the most rewarding for them if they were to pursue it both in high school, both in college. I hate to say this, Chris, but like, again, when I was growing up, going to college on a soccer scholarship in America was like the best of like that was the goal was to like wow man you made it to Division 1 or Division 2 soccer team in the US on a soccer scholarship. Those kids in Europe by the time they're 17 and 18 years old they are playing for Arsenal, they are playing
Yes.
for
Right.
PSG. I mean you look at some of these players. I mean Yamin Lamal he literally played as a 17-year-old for Barcelona. There's an 18-year-old kid, Hamza Abdel Karim, who plays for Egypt, who signed with Barcelona this year. In America, they would be going to college, and they would be going to
Right.
college where they're practicing, a couple of hours a week, playing one game a week. These kids are playing at the highest level of global soccer day in and day out under systematic pressure, under the most intense environments all year round. And that's why those countries produce some of the best soccer talent in the world. And by the way, it's not about population because you look at countries like Netherlands, you look at countries like Belgium.
No, it's not.
It's not. It's those countries are much smaller in size.
Croatia's crazy. It's 4 million people in Croatia.
Exactly, and they produce powerhouses in terms of national team year after year. Look at Norway. Norway is a small country, but look at Norway in terms of the success it's having at this World Cup.
Yeah, it was interesting. There's been a lot of writing about Norway sports development
Right.
and how like all youth sports are free. They don't even like they don't like it's
It's not
not that they
about
don't keep
winning.
score, but
Yeah.
yeah, they don't even like record wins until they're
Right.
12. There's like a whole philosophy around it. And you're totally right. I mean, the one thing I would say, this is not a sort of rebuttal, but I do think it sort of complicates the question is a lot of the trends you're describing are also true in a lot of other sports. I mean, it's increasingly true in like baseball, for instance. And I saw an interview with CC Sabathia, the great Yankees and Brewers pitcher, who talked about like he's like, I'm not even sure I would get into baseball or be recruited anymore because
Yeah.
my family didn't have the money to play travel baseball.
Yeah.
He's like, scouts go to the big travel tournaments and you got to fly and you got to stay in a hotel. And I've got a son who plays travel basketball and I'm sort of seeing how that works there too. But I do think honestly, aside from this development thing, the bigger issue is just to me, there's just not the same competition if you're a psychotically 99.9th percentile Egyptian 17-year-old in athleticism, you're going to play soccer.
Yeah.
It's just, there's just not the same battle between these other sports for, I was thinking about it as I've been watching World Cup. It's like Jalen Brunson would be a hell of a soccer player.
Yeah.
He's got like kind of a perfect body for it. He's got incredible balance and footwork. Like, you know what I mean? Like
Yeah,
there's
totally.
a bunch of things about
Exactly.
him size wise that would sort of work perfectly. It's like Jalen Brunson's dad was an NBA player. Even the NBA is an NBA player. Like how
Yeah.
many people are there like that, that are Mookie Betts? How good would Mookie Betts be as a soccer player if that's what he started doing at 8
Yeah,
years
yeah.
old?
Well,
So I do think that's a huge part of it.
there is, and I want to say something. Like, it's funny enough because my brother is, he was a standout soccer player at university, still has some records, played professionally. His son
Where did
now
he go to
is
school?
he went to Emory University,
Okay,
and
yeah, yeah.
played, and so his son now plays in Southern California. Their team actually just competed in a tournament in Spain, in Madrid, and they won that cup. They won
Wow.
against some of
Wow.
the best clubs in Spain. But the difference is they're still at a very young level. What happens is, how do these kids, when they hit 12, 13, 14 years old, that's the
Right.
difference. So in some ways,
Yeah.
American soccer, technically and skill wise, it's very competitive because you do have a country that is vast. You have a huge pool of players. You
Yeah.
have a lot of immigrant communities that love the sport. So a lot of that contributes to the success of it. But there is something that is breaking down between the very young level when kids are really out there having fun and enjoying it, and at that level where you start have to make decisions where the sport really kind of, basically engulfs you. Right now, you're choosing to play the sport, but at some
Right.
point, the sport is going to engulf you. And whether or not you're ready at that moment is a whole completely different thing. The culture of the way the sport of soccer is played in Egypt or Africa or South America is very different than the way the culture
That's
of
the
the
other
sport.
thing, that also the social cachet. I mean, that's
Right.
another thing about it too, which I think is just like, it's like being the star football player or star basketball player, I think just has a lot more social cachet. And like, I mean, again, and that matters when you're 15, 16, 17, 14,
Yeah.
13. That's part of it too. I also think there's something I think is also, in some weird way, like, I don't want to say this because I root for the US and I want the US to be good. And it would have been awesome to not, I mean,
Yeah.
that Belgian game was so it
Painful.
just
Painful.
painful and just and embarrassing in a way.
Yeah.
I was saying this to you on text. It's like Mexico lost to the UK, but like they went out with their heads held high
Yeah.
and like fought, and Egypt lost to Argentina and it was like brutal and heartbreaking. But again, they went out with their heads held high. Like the US got like had an
Yeah.
embarrassing final performance. It was just qualitatively different, even if you lose. But there's also something that, like, the US's inability to dominate global soccer is another thing I think that global soccer has going for it in a unipolar hegemonic world of US dominance. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, but look, the difference in that is that the sport of soccer is truly played around the world. I can't say the same about basketball, ice hockey,
Right.
and
No.
I
Right.
mean, that's the part that I think is sometimes lost in these conversations, is that America is so good at the sports that it has a bit of an advantage right, in the sense that the
Yeah.
pool of countries playing those country sports are not that many. I mean, even ice hockey, honestly, it's a recent thing that the US has become as dominant as it has, because it used to be the USSR or Czech Republic or
Right.
Eastern
Or
European
Canada.
countries, or Canada,
Yep.
exactly. So you can't even say that the US is dominant in ice hockey. It's certainly dominant in basketball. Baseball, how many countries around the world are truly playing baseball? And America is being
No,
able.
but even with that, it just lost the
Exactly.
baseball World Series to Venezuela. Like and that's a tiny country compared to the US in terms of how many
Exactly.
people they have.
Exactly. And so I think, like, when it comes to the issue of global soccer, um, the sport is way more developed around the world, that the United States is actually way behind, and is playing catch up. The part that I always get frustrated with US soccer is that so much of American soccer is driven by hyper capitalism. And what do I mean by that? Is that we believe that America can be the best at anything if we throw money at that problem. If we just put more resources in that problem. If
Yep.
we have the Nike sponsorships, if we have all the big sponsorships behind US soccer, if we can raise the profile and get a David Beckham and get a Messi to come play in MLS. That's not what's going to make American soccer
Right.
compete on a global stage, right? I mean, when you think about it, Egypt doesn't have a Messi. Egypt produces Mo Salah, and Mohamed Salah went to go play in Liverpool. And so
Right.
what you have to think about is, like, okay, America is now trying to get some of their players abroad, and they're trying to find players abroad that can represent America. But fundamentally, every 2 years, every 3 years, we get into this frenzy because we're told America is going to be great at this World Cup. We see the commercials, we see the ads, we see all of the hype. And in reality, for those of us who live the sport, they realize, like I certainly realize, that America's team doesn't produce the caliber of players, and it doesn't produce the style of play that is going to make America pop. Now, does that mean that it can have a great run at one World Cup? Yes, it can. Does home field advantage make a difference? It can. But as you saw in the game against Belgium, it was just very
They were
bad.
outmatched.
Outmatched,
They were outmatched.
outmatched,
Outmatched.
outmatched. You know. And by the way,
You know,
the Belgian team is not considered a powerhouse. They're a
right.
reputable team, but they're not a team that everybody's like, hey, these guys are going to potentially win the World Cup.
Yeah, and they were also, I think, probably the best team. Well, Paraguay was quite good, but well, I mean, and dispatched Germany, but they were the best team that we'd faced so far.
Right, for
So
sure.
there was
Yeah,
it was also
right.
the hardest
Yeah.
test. I mean, there's also, you know, part of it too. Someone said this to me, is an obvious point, but he's like, look, the national teams don't spend that much time practicing together.
Right,
So it's not systems and tactics. It really is just like it's more like pickup. It's
right,
like it's like how good are your players? And
right.
they're kind of creating in the moment. You're not This is not a team you spent 6 months with and you're drilled and scouting and you've game planned everything. Obviously there's some of that, but it's not like you're the team that you're spending all year with. It's much more ad hoc necessarily. And so it does select for like who's got the best horses basically.
Yeah, I mean, look, to compare this to Egypt for a moment, and this is a constant debate that is happening right now in African soccer that your viewers might appreciate. Two countries in Africa are very dominant in soccer right now. You've got Morocco and Egypt. This is again just in the context of African
Yep.
soccer, and certainly can include countries like Senegal in there, which just won the African Nations Cup controversially, but those countries all have players that play abroad. Some of them are actually born abroad and then they're recruited to come back to play in their home countries. But their ability to play in the top flight European clubs under pressure day in and day out is why they're able to come back and succeed in their national teams in such short periods of time. So when you look at a country like Egypt, the vast majority of Egyptian players are actually playing in Egypt's domestic league, whereas the vast majority of Moroccan players are playing in European leagues. And so the
Oh,
layers of the
right.
players and the quality of the players
And what they're playing against.
is what they're playing against. Exactly.
Yeah,
And the
right.
reason why I bring that up and why I think it's an important point is because the United States for the longest time wasn't really clear on, are we going to try to get these players from like Division 1 soccer players, are we going to try to get them from MLS, or should we go out and try to find American citizens who are playing in Europe who might have like dual citizenship, or people who might want to come and play for us that didn't make it, let's say, into like top flight European national teams? Because in European or in global soccer, you're allowed to represent both countries up to a certain age. So if you're an amazing up and coming talent who is, let's say, Moroccan or Moroccan French, up until the age of like 20 years old, I believe, or like under the youth system, you can represent France. But if you don't want to keep representing France, you're allowed to switch once you start
Uh-huh.
playing professionally. And you can decide to go back and play for Morocco or play for another country if you have claims to that country
Right.
or citizenship. So it's become this kind of very interesting debate within global soccer as to which players are allowed to see if they can make it in the top flight countries like France or England or Spain. And if they don't make it, say, okay, well, my alternative choice
Right.
is to come back to Morocco or to come back to Senegal. Now it's some countries, some players are actually saying, I grew up my whole life. I've been playing in France my whole life. I've been playing in Spain my whole life, but my parents, my ancestors, my loyalty is to Morocco or Senegal or Cote d'Ivoire or Cameroon. I'm going to go back and play for those countries because
Right.
that's like my national identity. And so you're seeing this debate happen in global soccer is,
Hmm.
should that be restricted? Should that be expanded? And it's kind of unfortunately led to a lot of the kind of racism that we see around various teams, right? Like you hear this debate all the time about, is the French team really French because all of these players are descendants of African immigrants that came to France, and some of them who made the French team represent France, some of them who didn't went back to represent countries that their parents came from or that their ancestors came from. And that debate is now starting to happen here a little bit in the United States as well, which is like, do you grow your own pool of players domestically and try to get them to go play abroad? Or do you go abroad and try to find American
Right.
citizens who are playing in
Right.
European clubs and bring them to
Oh,
represent
that's
America
interesting.
because they're big?
On this national identity question, I'm curious how this is a specific question aimed at you. As I've been watching this. So Tunisia was in the World Cup, right?
Correct.
Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, Egypt, all in the World Cup.
Yep. Saudi
Morocco
Arabia,
is the
Qatar, Iraq, Jordan. The reason why I say it is because this was the first World Cup that had so many Arab teams represented, and they were represented in two federations. You had the Asian Federation, which had countries like Iraq, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and Qatar. And you had North African or African Confederation, which had Tunisia, Algeria, Morocco, and Egypt. So you actually had 8 countries from the Arab world.
I'm curious if there are sort of cross currents or rules for how those affinities shift. Like if you're Jordanian and Jordan's out, are you like psyched for Egypt, or are you like screw them? Like, I was saying to you before, like it wouldn't be the case that if the Bears are out. I'm a Bears fan, even though I'm from New York, but I'm a Chicago sports fan. The Bears are out. I'm not like, well, Green Bay is close to Chicago, so they're representing the NFC Central, so I'm rooting for them. It's like, no, I hate the Packers. That's a defining feature of my sports life, is hating the Packers. Obviously, I'm rooting against the Packers. I'm curious if there are similar dynamics, say, just even among the sort of greater Middle East, North African region for those sort of regional connections.
Look, there are definitely rivalries, but because of the geopolitics of what the World Cup represents, a lot of those differences go out the window when one of these teams advances into various stages of the tournament. Look, Egypt and Algeria, they're soccer rivals. They have a lot of blood. They don't necessarily like each other, and when they compete against each other in various tournaments, it gets very violent sometimes. But when you're watching Algeria succeed at the World Cup, or when you're watching Egypt succeed at the World Cup, you root for that country because it's from your region. It represents your region. It represents the geopolitical values that you have. And this particular World Cup was very unique because you had an Egyptian team and an Egyptian head coach who's been very outspoken politically about what is happening in Gaza. And so when you see a national figure like that, and somebody who becomes an international figure and represents the region and the geopolitics of the region, these countries get behind them and they start rooting for them because of what they represent in terms of progress, in terms of values, in terms of geopolitics. There's, again, a lot of tension between Morocco and Algeria, but I am sure that a lot of Algerian fans, I'm sure there'll be a lot of Algerian fans who are going to be rooting for Morocco against France because of the fact that there's a lot of animosity between Algeria and France.
I mean, I got to imagine. I mean, my tell me if I'm wrong. My bet would be that across the entire MENA region, from Morocco east to Eastern Iraq, north to Syria, through the Gulf, is going to be pretty united in rooting for Morocco against France.
Yes, absolutely. There's no doubt about it. I mean, again, I mean, it's like when Egypt was playing Iran in the first round, the entire Arab world was probably supporting Egypt. There's no doubt that they're going to be rooting for Egypt. When Jordan was playing against Argentina, a lot of people, including myself, were rooting for Jordan against Argentina. It doesn't. The question of your identity and the question of who you support in soccer is very interesting. And I thought you were going to ask me about that because it's been like one of the funniest things that some of my friends, my American friends, have been asking me throughout the World Cup. It's like they see me one day wearing a French jersey, then the next day I'm wearing an Egyptian jersey.
I saw you in a French jersey,
and then I'm wearing a U.S. jersey, and then I'm wearing that's like, like in an American context, it would be like you waking up one day wearing like a Knicks jersey, then a Nets jersey, then a 76ers jersey. And everyone's like, dude, what are you doing? Like, who you support? And the reality is what you support and who you support in soccer has so many layers to it. Look, like, I'm born in Egypt. I support Egypt. My wife is Tunisian, so we support Tunisia in our house, but she's also French, and my kids are now French as well, so we're supporting France. I love the way France plays soccer, but at the same time, I live in the U.S., so I support the U.S. You know what I mean? So it's totally normal to have all of these layers of who you support depending on how the team. Now, does that mean you don't have like one team that is like your ride or die? I'll just say this. There's only one team that I traveled out of state to go watch, and that was
Yes,
Egypt.
I know. I was going to say, I know who that is. Yes. I saw the pictures.
So I'll let that speak for itself. But and tomorrow, watching Morocco versus France, I'm going to be rooting for Morocco. But if Morocco loses, I'll be wearing that French jersey when they play in the semis against Spain or whoever. And I'll tell you one other caveat.
You're perfectly emotionally, we call that, you're perfectly emotionally hedged.
Yeah, exactly.
That's what we call that.
Well, look, and I'll tell you something that you're probably never, ever going to hear an Egyptian say, which is if Argentina and England are playing in the semifinals, I'm going to have to support England in this case just because of what Argentina just did to Egypt. And I don't think that if you want to talk about like geopolitics and colonialism, to have an Egyptian come out and say that they're going to support England against Argentina, that's I know I'm going to get a lot of heat for that one. And I love Diego Maradona. I think he's like such an incredible icon in terms of the sport. But just after what I just went through with Egypt and Argentina, I'm going to have to root for Argentina to lose in that game against potentially England or Norway.
There was that viral tweet / meme of like people who are mad about the Argentina game of like, that game was so stolen from Egypt. It's on display in a London museum.
Yeah,
That's the
exactly.
line. That's pretty funny.
Uh,
Ayman Moladeen is my friend and my colleague at MS Now. And I got to say, Ayman, I've said this a lot, but you're just I feel so lucky to be your colleague. You're an
Thank
incredible reporter. You're an incredible broadcaster. You've got just you're an unbelievable professional. You bring something to our network that no one else does, and it's just really important
Chris,
that
that
we
means a
have
lot
you.
to
I
me,
feel
man.
very blessed and lucky that we do so. And this was so fun. Thank you for doing it.
No, thank you so much. That means a lot to me, Chris, and I've always looked up to you and have so much respect for you as well. So I really appreciate you having this conversation with me.